Welcome to Planet People Mining Season 3. I'm your host, Allison Koppel. Here we present the stories of trailblazers at the crossroads of mining, sustainability, and communities. Hear what motivates top professionals in this field of impactful work. Accompany them as they describe their challenges and explore the issues they tackle. And for our Spanish-speaking audience, busca Planet People Mining en español. Beyond the Numbers, Seeing a Hometown Through a New Perspective with Bryan Eisenbraun. Today I speak with Bryan Eisenbraun, External Relations Manager for the Plata Project in his hometown of Durango, Colorado. Bryan brings fresh eyes to the intersection of mineral exploration and the community, having pivoted from finance and accounting roles within the region to his current position. Our conversation explores his sharp yet aligned career transition, how his financial background strengthens community engagement, and his journey of viewing his own backyard through new perspectives. Bryan draws on his experience helping scale local companies like Osprey Pax and the payment processor Vantiv into globally recognized ventures, using those insights to better understand community expectations. He holds an MBA from Drake University and a bachelor's from Fort Lewis College. Outside of work, Bryan is an outdoor enthusiast and a dedicated soccer coach. Hi, Bryan. Really excited you're on the podcast today.
Hey, Allison. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm happy that we get to do this finally.
Yeah. So, introduce yourself beyond what I shared in the bio. What are a few major life and work milestones?
Oh boy. Yeah, well, so I'm Bryan Eisenbraun. I'm the External Relations Manager for the Plata Project, which is a mineral exploration project operated by Metallic Minerals. A few major life and personal milestones, huh?
Or work as well.
Maybe we start with where I'm at and go backwards from there. Like I said, I'm the external relations guy for the La Plata Project, which is here in Durango, Colorado, southwest Colorado, Four Corners region. I started here in July of 2024. And prior to my experience here on this project, I have no experience in the mining mineral exploration space, nor do I have any community engagement, external relations experience. This has been a professional pivot for me. Prior to this, I was an accountant and I worked for companies folks probably heard of called Osprey Pax, which is a company based out of Cortez, Colorado. So right here in my backyard. And then before that, I worked for a company called Mercury Payment Systems, who was acquired by Vantiv, which was a credit card processing company. Add a little detail to that. That was a $2 billion transaction, which is still kind of unheard of in our neck of the woods, but another local success story to the Durango and Four Corners area. Yeah, graduate of Fort Lewis College, which is the local university here. I played soccer there, moved here to go to the college, moved here from the Front Range to go to college and play soccer, and really fell in love with the area and have made it my ambition to make life in Durango a thing forevermore.
So I counted, it was a full 2 minutes and 39 seconds into the podcast before you mentioned soccer. So that might be a new record for anytime you and I talk. I just thought I'd throw that out there. But you started to say what your current role is. So how would you describe your current role and why is your work important?
My current role is really difficult to summarize, I would say. The external relations manager is the title, but it encompasses so much more than that. I am, for lack of better term, the face of this project in a community that really values public land, values an outdoor lifestyle, and values the proper utilization of its resources. And because of that, my role actually is more than just engaging with the community and this project. It's actually kind of developing a skill set within the project that is compatible with all of the various interests and priorities that this community has. So it's both external but internal in its direction.
So there's so much there that I want to dive into, but going back to what you've already shared, I mean, you shared you did a pretty big career pivot. I've worked with professionals from a lot of different spaces in this community space. A lot of times, journalists, lawyers, engineers, geologists. You are my first finance person. I have never seen this pivot from finance roles into the community space. So help us understand this pivot. How did it come to be? And I'm just going to throw out another question there. What so far has been the most surprising to you about this pivot?
I think to best describe this pivot, I got to kind of describe where I was at in the spring and summer of 2024. I had moved on from Osprey. We had done a transaction with Osprey that really was the precipice of me being hired there. And, we had succeeded by all measures in that transaction. That was the founders of Osprey were ready to move on, and they needed a route to move on that also ensured the brand would live on in a way that they had envisioned, and we were successful in that.
Oh, sorry.
Um,
Can you do a pause there? Because I don't know if everyone knows Osprey Packs, in all fairness.
yeah, so Osprey Packs is a backpack company. It started in 1974 in the garage of Mike Pfotenhauer in Santa Cruz, California, I believe. They moved the company to Dolores, Colorado in the years later. And really, it was the first kind of niche technical backpacking company that produced backpacks with advanced carry technology and storage technology for backcountry kind of, Colorado Trail or Appalachian Trail type through hiking activities. But the brand developed a cult following and they grew it out of southwestern Colorado to be, a $400 million company. So it's a massive success story for this local area and one that has like I said, a cult following. Those folks that know Osprey, they know it really well. They follow it and for good reason. So yeah, that's Osprey Packs.
All right. Thank you for that. Just wanted to catch everyone up. But go on back with your story.
Yeah, so I had moved on from Osprey and I jumped onto a startup that the looks of it was going to follow a similar path. It didn't. It actually kind of went the other route and turned into kind of the opposite of story than what I had worked on previously. That was really hard. I mean, ultimately, it ended up with me looking for new opportunities. And during my search, I found myself questioning a lot about whether I wanted to sign up for this merry-go-round, right? Where I'd help folks, help a team take a company to a certain stage and then not necessarily have a future. And it was hard work and I was missing something. While I had opportunities to do that again, I also was introduced to an opportunity here locally through family friends. And I could not stop thinking about this La Plata Project idea. It had similarities to what I'd done before, but it also felt so much more meaningful, so much more important. This is my backyard, and I do have kind of questions about what our project could lead to in a place where I recreate and I take my family in my Jeep all the time. And the thought of that really drew me in and made me want to be heavily involved in this conversation. And also the thought of the challenge of, threading the needle, if you will, here in my backyard and developing a project that could be immensely impactful economically, but also perhaps be some sort of bellwether example for what this industry domestically could do. It just fired me up. And so I jumped on board and dove in head first, and I'm having a great time.
So I imagine that you have to explain your role to a lot of people. I mean, you're in your own community and they're like, what are you doing lately? And I'm doing this. And even maybe other people in the industry or inside your company. Is there anything that you find yourself that you have to explain that is misunderstood about your role?
For sure.
Like what?
I think here locally, the thing that's hard to get across is that so you're not mining question. And really, it's difficult to keep people's interest beyond that. That's what everybody assumes, is that we're putting a mine in. And there needs to be some recognition of that, our work potentially leading to that. But we're really more focused on exploration and determining whether or not a mine is even feasible. That's a really complex conversation and process. So that's one for sure. But, then I think that there are conversations I have with friends of mine that they look at me kind of like I've got two heads at times. Like, why would you ever sign up for that? Why would you want to put yourself into that kind of boiling pot? And I'll be honest, I still have some moments where, I question myself even, but every time I think I'm jumping into a boiling pot, I kind of learn that the water's actually not that hot.
There's a quote right there. Okay, go on.
And the professional experience I have has actually set me up well for these conversations. A lot of my professional experience required me to explain complex financial topics to business leaders of non financial positions. And in those conversations, I found myself also being the guy that was lowering the temperature, making negotiations, and helping people cooperate and provide value to a high level vision. And so that's translated really well and just feels like me doing what I've always done.
That is so true. I mean, in full transparency, Brian's project's one of my clients and it was my first one. So if any of you have all listened to the 1 year anniversary, it actually was done 1 year after I signed the contract with this project to do work. So we've been on a journey for quite a bit together professionally. And I hadn't thought about that. I've seen you do this, obviously, with the team and what you've worked on externally is how do I distill this very complex information into a way that's easy to understand and follow along and align to. And then also, when there's lots of ideas going on and people are very, let's just say, passionate about sharing their idea, naturally being able to read the room. And that's what you had been doing professionally all along. And this is just a new scenario for that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of came across that analogy a few months into my experience.
Okay, so what else do you think you've been bringing over from your prior career that's been really helpful in this new role?
I only have my kind of one of one experience in the mining space. So I got to qualify my statement before I go much further that, this is my perception from where I'm sitting. But, I think that if you look around mining and mineral exploration domestically here in the States, there's been a real disconnect between how you can progress a project and what the boots on the ground kind of skill set is able to do. And one thing I kind of quickly was able to identify with our project here that I think applies in many other circumstances is that in the United States, and especially here in Southwest Colorado, the community is looking for a level of professionalism and skill set beyond geology, beyond looking at rocks and being able to determine what's going on underneath the ground. And that's akin to having a mature business and having various departments developed in a business that's been running for some time and has a level of maturity, like I said, that's difficult for a junior exploration team to have. And so I think a long way of answering your question, Allison, is that there needed to be some internal core competencies developed and then presented to the community as part of our social acceptance work attraction. And you outlined it through the guidebook exercise that you brought us through right immediately. And I see it from that business lens of this is a brand that needs to have recognition in the community. And our brand represents a personality, a set of values, and a vision within our community. And that's really what, in my mind, we're working towards.
I've never heard it though put in those terms. And especially with your finance background, and the different roles that you've had and the different perspectives that you've had in different companies. That's really interesting. That's put better than I've ever put it. I mean, I'm going to update that guidebook. But it really is, the community expects a level of business maturity to engage with it. And broadly speaking, not necessarily picking on the Plata Project or any other project in particular, but a lot of times early exploration startups don't always think of all those other business functions. Those will come later. We'll figure that out later. Let's just figure out what the rocks are in the ground and what metal's in the ground and get this technical report out. But to the other side of outside looking in, we're going to expect certain level of, like you said, a brand recognition. And I'm going to have a consistent experience with this company. And that's because this company is mature enough to have the policies and procedures and a consistent way of operating in a way that I'm used to any other business in my community. And especially if you come from a place where there is a certain level of maturity in business and you do have successful local stories such as Osprey Packs and other local businesses that, yeah, you live in, I was just looking it up, in Durango, Colorado, there's about 20,000 people living. So it's not a huge town. It's quite rural. I was just looking at planes to get to visit you guys next, and it's going to take me like a whole day to get there from Washington, D.C. But there's this level of expectation that you're showing up as a local business. We're going to expect for you to show up at this level. And that can be challenging in general, I think, for a number of exploration companies. So I like that perspective you just put in there. And that, I assume, comes from your finance background. It comes from your seeing companies from a background that maybe traditionally someone who's only been in the community space hasn't seen.
Yeah, totally. I think, I have been here in Durango for almost 25 years now. And I understand I've seen so many businesses come and go. And for whatever reason, I've got a good intuition around what a local business has that can be successful and what it doesn't. We here in Durango, like you said, we're disconnected and we come here for that disconnection from the outside world. It's almost like ideally located in some ways. And, that works for some people and it doesn't. But there's also a local fickleness that perpetuates that. And it's important, the La Plata Project and metallic minerals, to have a good pulse on what that means and how to represent ourselves in the community that way.
I do promote that social acceptance begins in-house. And I think what you're just talking here and the perspective I've seen you bring into this project, but is really in line with that. Of a lot of times we rush to that external engagement and what are you telling stakeholders and everything that is outside the company. But it all starts in-house. And you even mentioned it first, the values of a company. And then we already talked about the systems and structure of a company. But that is so key to that social acceptance piece. So that's interesting. I got to also call out, I mean, your use of Excel is so much better than anyone I've ever seen on a social team. Sorry, my other social teams. But there is a definite advantage of bringing someone from the accounting world into the social function.
Yes. Well, until you've sat and watched the Excel World Series, there's a level of Excel that exists well above anybody's, interpretation or usage of that tool.
Is that a real thing, the Excel World Series? I
It
don't know if
is.
any of
It
my
is.
listeners know about the Excel World Series. You're just going to have to tell us in a minute.
It is a thing. I don't know that I would suggest watching it. It can be very dry, but I know that some of my former colleagues, we would sit and talk about, did you watch this year's World Series, and talk about how advanced the people that are competing at that level are beyond, what we're doing. So
I learned something every time I do a podcast episode, and I did not expect that that's something that I would learn today. Okay, what I do like is you come with this fresh outside perspective to mining, but you've been almost about a year and a half into the broad mining sector. So, what is your perspective of emerging issues that the industry should be more focused on?
well, that's a great question. Having entered through the community engagement component and entered at what seems to be a time domestically where critical minerals and domestic production and processing of those minerals is at the forefront of our national focus and priorities. To me, it's the community relation and ESG work is so vital and so important, but also so achievable in my mind. It's something that needs to be done, but also can be done, and is another opportunity for us domestically to show how you can extract resources responsibly and how it can really benefit a number of people and a number of factors societally. It feels like we're at the precipice of some really interesting times. I'll tell you that.
I mean, because you're really speaking about this from the on the ground level and from someone who has just stepped in, well, not just, but a year and a half ago, stepped into this industry. And this is what you see. And for you, I've been saying similar things for a number of years, but you're just there and to say this is really achievable. That to me weighs very heavily and shows that there truly is a path to this. And as exploration, as mining development, gain speed, not just in the US, but in a lot of countries, to keep that practical vision that this is achievable. We can show that it's done responsibly. There are a number of examples where it's done responsibly, and to keep on it, I like that. I like that a lot. All right, last question. What advice do you have for others to succeed in this field?
In the community relations field or in the mining sector?
What comes to mind?
I would say that in both is tremendously important. We work on long timelines for sure, but also it's not necessarily a silver bullet or one thing you can do that steers the ship in a different direction. The work that we do in the engagement space, it's really relationship developing, and it's got to be focused on long-term relationships. I've thought of our project as being this kind of long-term relationship. The community sees the La Plata Mountains as their daughter, and here we are trying to date her. I don't know if this is an appropriate analogy or not, but we've got to approach this with a long-term mindset and respect the concern that her parents have and that they've got her best interests in mind. And we've got to approach with her best interests in mind as well. This is not a fling. It's what we hope to be a long-term thing. So that's how we need to approach that relationship.
I love that. I've talked about this work in terms of this marriage, but I like how you pulled that back. That's really what it is. And her parents have the best interests in mind. And we all want this to be a long relationship and we want it to work. And how do we approach that? And that you have to be patient with your first piece of advice there throughout this entire process. And that's not just in this external relations community field, that's the whole mining industry. That's brilliant. Yeah. All right, so I have to be patient. Any other advice?
I don't think it helps to put pressure on yourself. I think that was something I learned pretty quickly, is that each engagement hopefully leads to another engagement. There's not necessarily any one engagement that is going to make or break the project, that each one of them actually adds up to the overall project. And so it's more important that the engagement happen than it is that any specific thing happened within the engagement. And that took a lot of learning from me, especially not knowing what I was talking about necessarily all the time. It felt like a real barrier to me actually engaging with anyone initially. But over time, I've learned that that's actually kind of a strength of mine, is that I can walk in much more open-minded and much more willing to listen and take the pressure off me actually delivering anything, but rather me just being able to listen and get perspective and help then bring that back to our decision makers and develop a program that's more compatible with what this community is asking for.
I'm going to just stop it there. Yes, that was really well put, Bryan. Well, listen, this time has just flown by. I know you and I talk quite frequently, but I've learned a lot just this half-hour session. So thanks for being so open and being part of this podcast.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Allison. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you heard, please like, provide a 5-star review, and amplify.